Hi, I'm Michael Igen. This is Stephen Skeel. We're here with In Focus today. Our guest is Simon Rogers. Simon, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, folks.
So, Simon, we know you run A Little Better and have some really exciting things going on there. I briefly just want to ask you to give people a little bit of a history of who you are, how you got started in the branding and marketing industry.
I grew up in a very musical household playing multiple instruments. I was very fortunate that my parents encouraged musicality. By the time I was 5, I was playing guitar, drums, keyboard. It took classical, piano, jazz, multiple different instruments spinning off of that. But what happened was I became fascinated with the idea of multi-track recording. To be able to put all these pieces together. But to date myself, I learned about multi-track recording on a 4-track cassette tape recorder, which was my very first foray into actual music production, learning about how you combine instruments, how you can apply, very basic effects, and how you create a mix. That then turned into digital multi-track recording, and that then turned into the very early days of computer-based recording with a very early edition of Pro Tools, where I absolutely fell in love with the power of music production and the ability to combine multiple things to create just incredible audio experiences. Now, I was focused on a career, or had the idea of a career trajectory in neuroscience and psychology with the intention of going to medical school. I had, grew up thinking I was going to be a doctor, always wanted to help people, but in college, I launched a production company just to scratch that itch and doing recording for college bands, etc. And it took off. And some of my work got noticed, and I was asked to join a budding record label that was what was called a 360 record label. It was brand new. And they asked me to join in the production department and basically become a producer / engineer and help grow this thing. And if you're not aware, a 360 label, the theory was a full service creative agency, but the client is an artist instead of a business. And so through that, I got exposed to just the incredible landscape of production beyond music. So video production, graphic design, web design. And we're talking, like, just to give you again a sense of time, when websites were just images that were sliced into tables using Dreamweaver. Okay. So this was before responsive design. But I was so fortunate that I got to see incredibly talented people in action. I'm a big believer in the power of apprenticeships, learning through seeing. And so I got to watch people who really knew what they were doing do these things, and I started to do them as well. And I fell in love with the power of video production and then the incredible nature of storytelling and creating brands, etc. Now, again, to give you a context of time, this was right around the time that a little website called Napster popped up. And within I'd say 2 or 3 years, the entire business of music had shifted, right? So what used to be a booming business of creating music and video and full service creative experience for artists, I'm not going to say disappeared, but it shifted rapidly. And what ended up happening is that record label folded, and I ended up launching a creative agency with all of the tools and the skills and the resources I had learned. And instead of working with artists, I worked with businesses. I would say in a very 90s style, it was all about creating the coolest, most beautiful stuff. It wasn't really focused on, what are we actually working on here? What's the story we're telling? It was just, can we make beautiful cinematography? Can we make, really cool music? Can we make a beautiful website? That kind of thing. And I just, kind of one thing led to a next. And I started working with businesses, and I started working with businesses that became best of Philadelphia businesses. I was based in Philadelphia, and it kept growing. And eventually I joined forces with a strategic consultant who specialized in helping companies prepare for their IPOs or raise their seed to series, whatever the case may be. And we formed a joint venture, my creative engine, his strategic engine. And we started supporting large scale organizations, global organizations, far beyond what I had ever, worked on before. And one of our very first joint venture clients was a global healthcare organization in the clinical development space that was preparing for an IPO. And the charge that we had was to build a brand that helped paint them in a light that was completely different from their competition. And from my perspective, not coming from the clinical research world, it seemed so obvious what the story was. The story was, this is an organization that is making people's lives better, healthier, happier, etc. But that was new and novel at the time. You know, it was always very scientific, very technical. So what we did was we built a brand that was human. It was powerful, it was exciting, and it was based on emotion instead of scientific fact, data, which are all important and critical, don't get me wrong, but we brought in the human emotional element and it took off like wildfire. So much so that we were asked to come in-house. We were asked to join in and merge our agency into their world. And I was charged with forming a new agency in the healthcare space, where now my original career goals to help people in the healthcare space and my creative passions were coming together. And I launched this new division called Creative Labs, which was a creative agency specifically designed to help tell the story of the transformations happening in the clinical research space. What I saw was that there were three very different things coming together. One is the power of storytelling, the power of creativity, the power of human emotion and human connection is one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us. And we can use that power to absolutely differentiate, elevate, or otherwise, bring attention to an organization above any other organization. But the second piece of that is we can do that whether or not that is a valid differentiator, whether or not there's actually a unique value proposition. So the scary part of that power, I guess they say with great power comes great responsibility. The scary part is you can create the perception that any organization is doing incredible work that is making the world better, whether or not it really is. And this isn't designed to say that that organization wasn't actually helping people. This is simply to say that the third piece of that puzzle is I met so many organizations that were taking these really cool, new and novel approaches to making their worlds a little better, to solving challenges in new and novel ways that had never been solved before, or even undoing the damage that we as humans have done and continue to do. And I kept fantasizing, these little organizations that were struggling for resources, that were struggling to get noticed, that were struggling to get out, to get their audiences, hit their fundraising goals, etc. Well, if we could take this creative engine we built for this multi-billion-dollar global corporation and give it to those folks, we could actually make the world a little better, right? And so what I ultimately decided to do, we were very fortunate to help that organization through a massive record-breaking acquisition. And what I decided to do was leave and go back to my original agency roots and launch a new agency where we would take everything that I had now learned and built from this global organization and make it accessible and attainable and tangible to these little organizations doing really cool things. And I've spent the past 3 years researching how you do that, how you actually make that model work, how you help organizations go from their idea through their impact. And I'm sure we'll unpack a lot of that in this conversation. But what I'm doing today is actually getting ready to officially launch ALBC, which is what we, of course, call a Little Better Co., since that's a mouthful. And, we're going to put a bunch of new models out there and show folks how we help them get over these stall points that otherwise kill really cool, innovative, and potentially impactful ideas.
I have a follow-up to that, Simon. You talking about the power of storytelling, especially to just completely rebrand a massive organization.
Mhm.
Diving deeper into that, what are some of the tools that you found? Was it, I mean, I'm sure it was all of the above, but was it, okay, they need a new website. Okay, they just need a new brand look. They need, like, unpack that a little bit.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the most common mistake that folks make and what you really need to do to answer that question. So your question is, what are some of the components that go into rebranding a massive organization, especially in the face of a merger of different organizations, different cultures? And we might check off some of the normal boxes that we'd all think of, right? We're going to need a new website. Well, we're going to need a new logo, new fonts, new colors. We're going to need new messaging, etc. The real trick, though, to making it happen is say, who are all the humans involved in this transition that's happening? Who are the humans who work in these organizations? Who are the humans who these organizations impact? Who are the humans who will be aware on the outside in any shape or form that this transformation is happening? And quite frankly, most importantly, who are the humans that we need to inspire to want to engage with this new organization? And then it's the scientific method. So we know who they are, where are they today versus where do we want them to be tomorrow. So they may be aware that these organizations provide, we'll just use this example, clinical development services. We want them to think that this is the organization I must work with for any of my clinical development needs. How do you take each audience from here to there? What is that journey from they are aware that this exists or maybe don't even know that it exists to they desperately want to engage with this organization? What's the unique value proposition that we can offer them as this new entity? And how do we tell that story in a way that resonates with them? Once you unlock that, then you reverse engineer into all the creative tactics that support that story, video being an incredibly critical element therein, right?
That's so interesting. I have a question for you too. So it sounds like you're more or less building like a funnel in a way, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, you could say that.
and for like a giant multi-billion-dollar healthcare organization, what does it look like the difference between like a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead? And like when are you getting phone calls coming in to the organization being like, "Hey, we want to work with you"? Like, how do people reach out to like a giant multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical
That
company?
is a wonderful question, and we could again spend hours unpacking this. So, when you get to the level of having, thousands and thousands of people, you're typically going to have two very different teams. You're going to have a marketing team, you're going to have a business development team. And they play different complementary roles, but the role of the marketing team is to get this organization on the radar and inspire an interest, inspire an emotional response that gets them proactively interested and engaged so that then the business development team can take over and work through an actual funnel and say, okay, we know you're interested. Let's talk about what and what we do for you. When we talk about marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, there's a rubric that we could create and go through all of this. But again, I think it's a really interesting analogy that you bring up that it essentially is a funnel we're creating. And our lighthouse, our beacon at the very top of that funnel is the power of storytelling and emotion, making something that was previously unnoticeable, noticeable, making something that was previously unmemorable, memorable, making something that was previously boring, exciting, right? And most importantly, finding little nuggets that resonate with people so that they eventually engage. But yeah, I just wanted to be clear. This is not like a direct to consumer, we're going to make an incredible video and then folks are going to click the buy it now button on a website. It's a long journey, typically 7 different engagements before people make a decision therein. But that's the critical role of storytelling at the very top of that funnel to say, this is where you want to go.
Mhm. How do they reach out though? That's my biggest question too. Are they reaching out just like a form submission on the website, like one pharma company to another, like, "Hey, I wanna" like
Yeah.
picking up
There,
the phone? Like, how does that work?
Typically, it's different for everybody. So it could be anything from people are actually conducting their own in-house research to determine what large B2B service provider they want to work with, and
Mhm.
they submit a request, right? They may actually click the give us an RFP or an RFI rather as the first stage, a request for information just to tell us more about you. And so it does happen where organizations will go through a website as a third party to say, I'm interested, I need you to tell me more about you, and here's what I'm looking for. So an RFI would be the first stage. But there is a lot of actual human relationships involved. So a lot of it from a business development perspective is finding out who actually works in the relevant positions at the organizations we're interested in and building human relationships. And in that case, if the human relationship is the first element, we can then reverse back and as marketing, give those business development people unbelievably powerful tools to show why they're different and to validate whatever their sales pitch may be. Does that
Got
make
it.
sense and
Yeah.
answer your
That makes a
question?
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like it's more than like a B2C company with large, and we deal with this from some angle on our end. I know it's different in the healthcare and pharmaceutical space, even more so than a lot of B2B clients. But it's interesting to hear from you. It's like giving the sales team sales collateral to then
That's right.
reach out to the people, and the materials just build a stronger relationship. It's not necessarily like one hard metric, like, hey, we're getting way more form submissions because of this. It's like more like what you're saying, an emotional thing
Yeah.
creating.
Ultimately, all coming back down to, in this very large scale world, the very last stage is usually a bid defense where there is an in-person meeting to say, all right, here's everything we talked about. Here's everything you asked for. Here's how we would solve your challenge. And here's why this is the best fit for you. And then a decision is made. And this is where, the role of what marketing would do in storytelling to get all the way to a successful bid defense may start all the way at the beginning from just making an organization aware and attracted to what we're doing, all the way through providing the most compelling storytelling for that bid defense itself. And on many occasions, we would create really high-end videos or stories that show the impact of the work we're doing to kick off a bid defense meeting. So it really is a partnership where the business development folks are forming the relationships, growing the relationships, facilitating the transfer of information, but we are providing the emotional and powerful, adhesive that brings it all together.
Mhm. And I
And
remember
that,
working on some of that with you,
yeah,
was the bid
we've
defense.
collaborated
Yeah.
on a bunch of those
Yeah.
things. And as you guys, I'm sure, recall, that's often the difference between, a lot of organizations have the same capabilities. What we do as storytellers is often the differentiating factor, right? It could be, sure, their price is a little better, or we've got a slightly faster turnaround time, whatever the case is. We now live in the world where the ability to tell a compelling story and get folks excited and elicit that emotional response is often the deciding factor. It's more important
Yeah.
than ever.
I mean, you think about, you might be wearing one t-shirt and it costs $10, and then someone else might be wearing the same exact t-shirt with a brand icon on it that is a certain story, a certain connotation, and it costs $150. And I do remember, like Micah was talking about, a lot of what we worked on was getting at the root of the why people are working at the organization, why people trust the organization. And I think you told us some anecdote at one point about how the videos that we collaborated on like helped broker a relationship between executives at organizations and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll just elaborate on that. One of the things that we sometimes forget, and I'm saying we collectively as the people who are in this business of telling stories, is, we always focus on the client or the end user or the public, but the internal stakeholders, the actual audiences, the leaders themselves are just as critical, if not more so. And oftentimes we would use the power of storytelling to help different organizations with different mindsets and different experiences and different backgrounds come together and see things from the same perspective. Oftentimes what we can do is we can make something that isn't really clicking, tangible, exciting, and powerful. And I know we've collaborated quite a bit on, we would have annual sales meetings back when we used to collaborate in these large corporations. And a lot of the whole idea was to inspire a very large group of people with very different opinions, very different backgrounds, very different expertise to see, this is where we're going, and this is why I'm excited to go there together. And that can make or break the success of an organization's ability to work together. So internal, just as important as external.
Yeah, and I'm remembering that one specific sales video we did with you one year. That one was a lot of fun. So
I remember there was one, I remember it was always a big push at the end of the year. We needed to get things in like by December 31st at midnight because the sales meeting was and I remember like our team being up until midnight on New Year's Eve trying to get audio files configured.
Yeah, sorry about that. I will tell you from my perspective, many late nights into early mornings trying to get things ready last minute. But I think most folks hopefully will never have to experience what we do to get these things ready on time.
It's part of the business.
Part of the
It's part of the
business.
business.
Yeah.
When you brought us in to help and through our collaborations over the years, how have you seen the content demands or formats change over time?
As I mentioned earlier in the setup, I love cinematography. I love it. I mean, if I were a totally irresponsible person, I would go out and buy an Alexa 35 and Orion Anamorphics or whatever the new Mercury series is with a little bit of that, dirt on it. And I would just go shoot beautiful cinematography. I love it. Absolutely love it. And when we first started creating video content for a large corporation, part of what separated it was cinematic video. It was, oh my gosh, this is not just a low quality talking head of somebody on a green screen. This is beautiful. This is, if I do say so myself, we would go shoot patient stories and show these really beautiful, intimate moments that felt cinematic, that felt like something that transcended what you would expect to see at your business. And on a subconscious level, that tells our different audience members, especially internal folks, this is serious. This is high end. This is, something that we're seriously investing in. And it got to a point where while I love doing it, my real responsibility was figuring out what are the stories we should be telling and how do we tell them in the most compelling way, and not having the resources to be able to also create those videos. Just to go way back, when I first came to you, I had actually, I don't know if you remember this, I had put a call out to a bunch of folks that I knew, including our mutual friend and former teacher, Ellen, to say, who do you know who's really good at video? Right? And your name came up, saw your examples, and I thought, yes, this is the person. This is the organization. Seven Wonders has it. Sorry, Michael, not to discount what you're doing here.
Well, all good.
Not like it's not a business. But I distinctly remember thinking, yes, this is the person who can do the quality that we're looking for and the efficiency and the ability to have all the pieces. And I don't have to worry about that aspect of it. I can focus on what it is we're trying to say and the why we're saying it. And so we brought you in and you started producing more for us, and your capabilities collectively started to expand and you got so much better. And then the question you're really asking is, how have I seen the type of content, the demand for content changed? And that's what's so fascinating about today. I'm going to answer this one in two parts. Part one is an anecdote of, there are times when I just wish I could take my video gear closet and go back 10 years, because we could dominate the industry just doing beautiful high-end, probably slow motion work, because that was a lot of what was really hot for a while. We have now gone to a place where it's easier than ever to create gorgeous work, right? You can buy a Blackmagic cinema camera 4K for what, like $600 on eBay, slap an old photo lens on there and you can get great work. We've now moved from high-end cinematic production to relevant content that tells a story that's meaningful to me and my journey, and helps support the idea that this is not just one touch point. This is not just, I'm going to have 10 minutes to sit down and watch a short form documentary. It's, I need a journey of a story that brings me along, that is consumable on my schedule. And so what we're doing here is a really good example of where the content demand has moved. Right? It's not as important as it used to be to have a beautiful cinematic high-end piece that tells what you're doing. It's much more important to convey the why, the what, the how in a more conversational, and again, consumable nature. And so what I'm seeing these days is when organizations are thinking about video, it's typically a short, maybe 2-minute max explainer to make sure that there is an elevator pitch that can be sent ahead to a conversation or supported after a conversation, which could be cinematic, right? It could be motion graphics, could be animated. And then everything else from a video perspective is all based on supporting that sales funnel. So we're going to preemptively guess what the questions somebody might have are along that journey. And we're going to prepare content for them that answers those questions in a desirable way, so that when they finally reach out to us, they're already ready to go, right? We've already basically had a conversation with them. And while there is part of me that feels very sad and mourns that there aren't a lot of people looking to do short form documentary as much as there used to be, at least from my perspective, this mode of content generation seems far more productive and far more impactful for today and tomorrow's audiences. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Now I feel like
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, The only caveat I would have to that is we've seen the exact same trend in our business. Obviously, we're in it every day and we see and hear what clients are looking for. There is demand for, like you said, that 2-minute explainer piece. And that for certain brands, that's less important. For other brands, it still needs to look polished. But as far as the rest of the marketing efforts are concerned, I think authenticity is the most important thing in the storytelling. And what Michael and I and our team, we talk about a lot is, what does quality mean to the customer? Quality doesn't necessarily mean the nicest lens. Quality means, what is the story you're telling and what is the message you're sharing, and does that resonate with the audience? There is a litmus test. There's a barrier you need to cross in terms of quality. It can't be so bad that it's unwatchable. But once it's past that barrier and you've established credibility with just the baseline, it's more about consistency and just speaking to your ideal customer. Someone was telling us that on LinkedIn, for example, LinkedIn is like completely deprioritizing any generic looking content. So stock images, text on a colored backdrop, in favor of promoting authentic voices, like this type of format. If you're sharing actual thought leadership, it's a lot more compelling and they want that to be more latched onto.
Quick comment in response to that. You mentioned stock photography. That's a perfect example of the transition that's happened. We went from, stock photography for everything, where, I mean, you look at some of this stuff now in retrospect and you go, oh my gosh, are you serious? Like a bunch of folks high-fiving in a conference room who would obviously never, ever do that in real life. Very carefully crafted scenes that are so not realistic. So we went from that to, okay, we can at least do high-end stock photography. Like if you think about what you see on Offset, where it's beautiful, it's cinematic stock photography. It's not posed, it's not practical. To what people want now is just either show me what's really happening, your people, or just use some graphic fillers, because there's no point, right? What is the point in having just some beautiful stock photography if it doesn't actually add value to the story, if it's not authentic, and if it doesn't help move me forward in my understanding of why I should want to engage with you? So same thing with video, right? But on a more complex level. It's a wonderful, wonderful analogy.
All I was going to say was, well, two things. One, we're seeing a trend for, unless you're spending an exorbitant amount of money making an ad, making a spot, and making it really cool to watch, it almost seems more fake than real. And I think the consumers can see through that BS more now than ever, because there's so much more content that they're consuming. Just like walking on the street, unless it's a real person walking in the street, people can tell if it's an actor or not. So that's one. Two, I have a theory, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on
Let's
this.
hear- I
Simon.
can't
You
wait.
heard it here first.
Yeah,
I
here we
haven't,
go.
I
Here we
haven't
go, folks.
spoken to Steven about this yet,
Oh
but
boy.
I have a theory that the social media platforms are going to integrate AI into the social media platforms, and AI is able to detect AI at like a 99.9% frequency. So I think they're going to start labeling content that is made with AI to say made with AI at the bottom on every platform. And it's going to make the AI made content drop to the bottom. So I think people think that's going to be a shortcut, but in reality, it's actually going to end up being super deprioritized in the future and dropping to the bottom anyway. So
Well, I want to unpack two things that you just said, because, oh my gosh, are we going to go on a tangent here? First, just to address the visuals, like you gave a great example, walking on a street. I think back 10 years, there was a time when there wasn't such an onslaught of content that you could get away with a beautiful slow motion shot, even if it didn't, add to the story that's happening, because it was beautiful and people had patience for that. People don't have patience anymore. So slow motion in and of itself has gone away, unless it's part of a super high-end ad. I mean, again, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but right now we now have an audience that says, tell me exactly what I need to know as quickly as possible. And if you can make it pretty, great. And that's fine. But now we're at a point, just like when you're writing a script in a movie, if it doesn't add to the plot, it gets cut, right? So everything is about, I'm going to get to the point as quickly as possible and try to work that emotion in there. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you bring up a really, really critical point with AI and just the explosion in content in and of itself. So because I can't think of any audience that's not exposed to just an insane amount of content. We have started automatically just filtering it out. And so now we have this situation where there's so much content out there that it's so hard to sort through what's valuable, what's relevant, what's meaningful to me. And now that's accelerated exponentially with AI content that isn't even real. And now we've got AI assistants that will go through and summarize your email and your feeds and tell you what you should and shouldn't be reading. And we have to stop and say, hold on a second. We're humans trying to communicate with other humans. And now we've got all of this content in between the two humans that we're trying to connect that's making this massive onslaught of noise that we're using other AI to sort through. What happened? Right? That's all to say the only thing that matters now is authenticity and emotion, right? So one piece of authentic, emotionally connected content is infinitely more powerful than 50 pieces of garbage just because you can make it quickly, right? And so what I'm hopeful is that folks will very quickly see that they should be investing in, how do I tell my story in the most authentic and direct way, in the most impactful way?
And it's so funny because what you're saying, Simon, is so true too, from like a sales conversation perspective. Like we get on calls with some clients and they might say like, oh, well, someone's offering it at this cost or blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, we can't do the labor even with AI and make any type of profit. We'd be losing money at that cost. So I know that some of our competition is doing things in a subpar manner just to appease people. But at the end of the day, I think that that's going to end up catching up with some of the brands. And I'm not saying brands have to spend an astronomical amount of money doing content like what we're doing right now. You can do this at a reasonably affordable price and pump out a lot of content on a regular basis. But when a client wants to pump out a lot of animated videos and blah, 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 it gets to be a lot. And like you're saying, it's just noise, a lot of it. It's not even benefiting anyone.
I'm curious, Simon, to elaborate a little bit on authenticity being the most important thing for human connection. Why might this type of format be a strong play in the future? I know you mentioned you had interest in doing it. I have a whole litany of reasons in my head, but I'm curious what your take is.
I could agree with you with there are just a ton of reasons, but top of mind for me is this type of content's really interesting because right now I'm going to steal from somebody else that I talked to. There's something really interesting happening where we have a trust deficit. So we are service providers, right? My business is about helping brands figure out who they are, creating new brands, reimagining brands, and helping them get over these stall points that could otherwise, crush their ability to move forward. But we've got a trust deficit. So if folks don't know who you are, if they don't have your background, it is easier than ever in today's day and age, again, especially with AI, to create a false narrative, to create the idea that we are something that we're not, or we are capable of something that we're not. And what is happening as a result of that is if somebody gets a proposal, right, there is immediately an inherent distrust of the information that's being shared. Because, Michael, to your point, it has already caught up to people that have just been throwing money at stuff and saying like, oh, we do this and we do that and we do this. And so content like this is most critical, in my opinion, for building trust. I am just fascinated to get folks to have a conversation about what it means to do a little better to them as the name of our company. And it's a really important way for folks to see, yeah, we are actually serious about this. There are a lot of organizations that claim, we're in the business of trying to help people. And then you unpack and find out that their top clients are big oil, which in fact, there is a whole new initiative called Clean Creatives, little plug here if you don't know about it. A lot of organizations in our space make the most of their money from organizations that are not aligned to the mission that they claim to have on their website. So things like this really help to illuminate authenticity and give people a sense of who you really are and start to build trust.
That's
Very
awesome.
cool.
I also would ask, obviously we come from a background of training in, like you said, high-end productions, cinematic storytelling. There's all these bells and whistles associated with that. But what we've seen is a lot of clients don't necessarily find value in those components. It's more about our training and our team's expertise in actually conveying the message regardless of the format. And so I'm curious your perspective on that too. Like, okay, the type of video might change, the type of format might change, but your knowledge base of how to put that together is really what a client should be after.
I'm a big fan of Dave Matthews Band. I love production. I love music production. I am a huge fan of Steve Lillywhite, who is the producer behind the first 3 major Dave Matthews Band albums, which to me are a masterclass in the power of production, mixing, mastering, and figuring out how you take a lot of really strange mismatched elements and make them sound incredible together. It wasn't until recently I actually started listening to the lyrics and the stories and was like, what's happening here? Like, I don't even understand what's happening. So I really struggle as a human with accepting what you're saying, which is absolutely valid. 90% of people out there don't care how it is created or the cinematic quality or what lens or what production element. They care if it has an impact that moves them towards their objective. So I need this audience to think this and do this thing. I want to see that these people are now doing the thing we wanted them to do, right? So the mode is not nearly as critical as the end result or the impact. It's not about the mode of production. It's about the end result of that production. And new capabilities like this, like Riverside, like these at-home studio captures that we're doing, can be just as powerful, if not more, than a massive production with incredibly high-end cinema that, quite frankly, could be written off as, what are they overcompensating for? You know, why are they investing so much in this story instead of just being authentic and direct? It's a very different time that we live in now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to see how everything's shifting. But again, the core, the storytelling is still the important part.
Exactly.
It's
That has never changed. And I think about, the history of us as humans, I have to qualify. My understanding is that knowledge has been translated throughout all of human history with storytelling, right? Up until recently, where we had the ability to share information digitally and capture it in reading and writing, etc. It was all about telling stories. That's how humans have evolved to communicate information. And stories that have had emotional impact have been far more successful and lasting than those that haven't. We're wired to resonate with whatever communicates an emotion to us and gets us to go from where we are to where we want to be. And on a scary note, we're seeing that on a massive level here in America with the ability to get folks to think and believe all sorts of things. But that's the power of storytelling, right? With great power comes great responsibility. The power of storytelling and creativity are transformational, but they have to be used carefully. I really would encourage folks to say, if you're going to invest in telling your story, make sure you understand what your story is and why it matters from the perspective of the audiences that you seek to affect, and understand what you need to do to tell that story in a way that will get them from where they are to where they want to be. And if you're going to invest, yes, absolutely. If you're able to put your elevator pitch in the best possible package, do so. But everything beyond that, this type of content is emerging as a much more successful and impactful vehicle for storytelling.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Simon. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm a big fan of you guys and what you've been doing, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Same here. Thank you.